we have arrived in a place where people are not going to just trudge through it. 80% of the respondents in our survey said that it is acceptable to leave a new job before 6 months if it doesn't live up to your expectations. 80%. That should strike fear in the heart of every recruiter and hiring manager who is putting a sales pitch on instead of talking about the realities of the role. It is so important that we are transparent, that we talk about our challenges. We want someone to love us warts and all, and in order for them to do that, they have to know that we have warts.
Welcome to the Work for Humans podcast. This is Dart Lindsley. Today I'm speaking with Shayla Thurlow. Shayla's the VP of People and Talent Acquisition at the Muse. The Muse is a platform that helps people find work that matters to them. And it does this a lot of ways. It does it by matching people with coaches and with career advice and with employers. But unlike other sites that focus largely on skills, the Muse is focused on matching based on things like values and purpose and culture. The Muse has some 7 million monthly users, so that puts them in a special position to gather data on how people are feeling about work right now, and in particular, what people want next. I thought it would be great to have Shayla on the show to tell us about their findings. Shayla has decades of experience in HR and has expertise in talent acquisition and diversity and inclusion, performance management, leadership training, and organizational design. In this episode, Shayla and I discuss how often people feel shift shock. That's the feeling when you take a new job and you have that moment of, uh-oh, I think I've made a mistake. We talk about what job seekers are saying is the most important feature they're looking for in their next job. And we talk about flexibility in the workplace and some of the confusion around what that actually means for employees. And we talk about, fairly candidly, some of the problems with modern HR, as well as other topics. If you enjoy this episode, please remember to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. Now my conversation with Shayla Thurlow. Welcome, Shayla Thurlow, to Work for Humans.
Thank you so much for having me. It is a pleasure to be here. I'm looking forward to talking about work.
I'm fascinated in a lot of the research that the Muse has done, and we're going to get into that. But before we get into that, I want to ask you the question, who do you see is leading the change of work in what work should be?
The group that is leading the change in what work should be is really the workforce, the emerging workforce, as well as folks who have been in the workforce for a while, have seen all of the things that we don't like about work, and those folks are driving change. For a very long time, I thought it was folks like us who were HR professionals or organizations leaders who would shift the way that we work and push for balance and all of the things that we know make work better. But work isn't going to fix itself because work is working for work. Work isn't working for the workforce anymore. And the workforce is driving the changes that have certainly been long needed in how we view work, how our organizations view us. And I'm excited about the future of work. I'm excited to see folks coming into the workforce and saying, the way that you've done things worked for others, but it doesn't work for me. And really helping shift our attitudes and ideas about what work should be.
How's it showing up?
It's showing up in a lot of ways. I think the biggest way that it's showing up right now is workplace flexibility. Work-life balance is a term that's been around for as long as I've been in the workforce, probably predates me. But I certainly remember that being a really big thing for employees, but not necessarily something that companies valued. I remember talking to executives about work-life balance and having them groan and shake their heads and frown and roll their eyes because work-life balance was associated with not really wanting to work. And what we're seeing now with the push for flexible working arrangements, but real flexible working arrangements. A few years ago, when a company said they had flexible working arrangements, it meant that you could beg to work remotely twice a year. And that was flexible. And now flexible work arrangements are really flexible. They are starting at a time that suits you, managing your day. I like to tell folks that I don't want someone to fit their life into work. I want them to fit work into their life. And that means prioritizing the things that matter to you in your real life while still making sure that you're meeting your work obligations and responsibilities.
The Muse recently did a study, and it was a study about shift shock. What is shift shock?
Shift shock is that overwhelming feeling of, oh my God, this job is not what I thought it would be. And it's very interesting as I talk about shift shock all the time, clearly. And people are like, wow, that's new. And I'm like, but it's not new. What's new is that we have a term to describe it. I could walk into a room and ask people of any generation, any stage of their career to tell me about the time that you took a job and when you got there, you realized that it wasn't what you thought it was. This has been happening in the workforce. One of the things that I'm very excited about is that we talk about it now. I've personally experienced shift shock, and I know a lot of folks have. And I am from that generation of the workforce where you don't talk about it. You just trudge through it. Nobody likes their job. You shouldn't expect to like your job. And nothing is what you think it is. And you just have to make the best of it. And it is so refreshing to see that we're talking about this and we're talking about it in a meaningful way. And my hope is that the conversation surrounding shift shock and making sure that folks who are in positions to hire hiring managers, HR professionals, company executives, folks who are interviewers fully understand now that we have arrived in a place where people are not going to just trudge through it, where folks are going to say, hey, this isn't really working for me. 80% of the respondents in our survey said that it is acceptable to leave a new job before 6 months if it doesn't live up to your expectations. 80%. That should strike fear in the heart of every recruiter and hiring manager who is putting a sales pitch on instead of talking about the realities of the role. That number should frighten them because what that means is that they are setting themselves up for churn. They are creating a situation that is going to be untenable for new workers. It is so important that we are transparent, that we talk about our challenges. We want someone to love us warts and all. And in order for them to do that, they have to know that we have warts. This survey was just a really amazing data point for me because we've known this. We've known this all along. And now we're able to put numbers behind it. And I think once you start putting numbers behind it, then that really helps people understand the risk that they're undertaking by overselling a role.
I remember a study that was done by one company. They had something like 90% turnover in the first month of the job. The job was to go into these giant tanks and hose them out with fire hoses, these tanks that had been like burning fat or something. I don't know what it was. But anyway, so what they did was they created a video of the job, of what it was really like so that people could understand it coming in. And they completely changed their turnover rates because people really knew what they were getting into. And so somebody said, yeah, I can do that. I've done worse than that. And they stuck in the job. And it's funny, people have stopped talking about it, I think, over the last few years, but grit and the feeling that there's a generation coming up that is not as tough. I have very mixed feelings about that for a couple of reasons. One is I have observed it, A, and B, I'm not sure grit is healthy, which is it can force you to stay in a situation that is damaging you. So I'm not sure I admire it as much as I used to.
I think it takes more grit or bravery to walk away from something that is not for you than it does to stick it out. I hope that my generation of workers is the last generation who has been in therapy because they cannot cope with their jobs. I hope that folks coming in don't believe that being in something that damages your mental, physical, and emotional health is okay because look where it can take you. It takes you a lot of places. And yes, sure, it can take you up the career ladder, but it can also take you to the hospital. It can take away the joy that you have in other aspects of your life. It's just not worth it. And, I've certainly had this conversation numerous times. Like these folks coming in, if they don't like the job, they leave. Well, they should.
Exactly.
They actually should leave. Like, how can you say that as an HR person and then you have to go recruit more people?
Right. And from my position at looking at work as a product, if somebody buys a product and returns it, that's rational behavior if they don't like that product when they buy it. A lot of my family are teachers. And I'll tell you, there is a teacher apocalypse going on right now, which is two things are happening. One is lots of teachers are just walking away from the job. It has been so hard for the last 2 years and they are so burnt. And they've also had an experience of getting very mixed messages about whether or not their health was valued by their employers. And so all of a sudden, the relationship with the employer has really changed. But another thing that's happening is that the credentialing programs are half full. So we have a lot of teachers leaving the profession, and we have a lot fewer teachers actually coming in. And these are top teaching programs. There's one at the University of California next to me, and it's kind of half full. And this is, I think, to some extent, what you said at the very beginning, which is that people who work at companies are telling us they are walking away from work that is not designed to meet their needs.
We saw it certainly with teachers, but I think we also saw a lot of that with HR professionals during the pandemic. HR roles have always been stressful, but the pandemic shone the brightest light imaginable on so many of the very broken things about work itself, about our organizations, about our organization's leadership. And there were so many HR folks who were carrying their organizations on their back and they just couldn't do it anymore. And for me, I hoped that that would be a very clear signal to organizations that the people who are responsible, who are the caretakers of your organizations, are saying, I can't take it anymore. And I would hope that that would have prompted a shift.
It's interesting because I think HR professionals and teachers both gained a lot of respect. The professions did. Not that people wanted to do them, do those jobs. But my wife's a teacher, and all of a sudden she was now teaching online into people's homes. And parents, for the first time in many cases, got to see her at work. And their respect went through the roof because they could see the amazing thing that she was doing. It's also true that there were teachers who just weren't able to step up. The technology was too much or some other thing. And I think that the HR profession has seen something along the same lines, which is that in many cases, HR saved the day through the pandemic and was really there at the table and made it work. I want to go on to another study that the Muse did around the important factor while choosing a job. I don't know what population the Muse serves. I'm assuming that a lot of the population that the Muse serves is people coming out of school, but I'm not sure. So who was the population that was in this particular study about the most important factor while choosing a job?
Sure. So this was a new grad survey. So we were surveying folks who were coming into the workforce. And this survey was also very interesting to me as well. What was shocking to me is we hear a lot about student loan debt and the crisis of this and folks coming out of college, tens to hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt. And I thought surely compensation is going to be the number one factor for folks who are entering the workforce post-graduation because they're coming in saddled with debt. And so finding the highest paying job possible to help get you in a better financial situation, surely that's going to be the driver. And it wasn't. It was work-life balance.
Yeah, it's interesting. The two highest things on this were learning and growth opportunities. And I think it's a statistical tie in the study with work-life balance.
Yes.
Have you ever dug into what that means, work-life balance? Because when I started at Cisco Systems, I remember in the orientation, they said, we've gone beyond work-life balance. We're into work-life integration. And what they meant was you're going to be working all the time. And that was kind of true. So what does that mean? Like, do we all agree what it means?
We do not all agree on what work-life balance means. And that's some of the challenge, right, for employers is when someone says they want work-life balance, someone usually says, well, we have a lot of vacation time. And they're like, well, that's balance, isn't it? And the person's like, actually, that's great. But for me, balance is being able to attend Timmy's soccer game and coach Little League and go to gymnastics, or maybe balance is being able to go for an hour walk during the day. And so I think we are all very challenged by figuring out what balance means to people. And the truth is that it's a very individual thing.
Yeah. Again, going back to work as a product, products fit into your life. That's what good products do. And I had an interesting conversation with somebody from India recently, which is that we've rolled out a 3-day, 2-day hybrid. So 2 days at home, 3 days at work. And what this person from India said is, he said, that does not fit my life. He said, lots of people who work in the cities in India have families that are out in the countryside or in neighboring towns. And what we want is a week on, week off model, because the week off, we want to be with our extended families in our hometown. This 3-day thing in the middle of the week, it means we can't go home, or if we do, we're traveling all the time. And I was like, that is a perfect example. It's a perfect example of designing something with the best intentions and blowing it because we don't understand the structure of people's lives that product needs to fit into.
That is 100% correct. And I really love that example. That is that is the brightest shining example of the disconnect between what employers believe is flexible and what employees need in flexibility. It's one of the things about work that's always been very interesting to me is that a lot of organizations decide what flexibility means instead of asking what flexibility means.
And I will tell you another thing is that when you survey for what people want and then you actually see what people do, it's sometimes hard to know. And that's somebody recently on the show introduced me to the term the say-do gap, which is you ask people, but how they actually make decisions can be quite different. Our surveys did not accurately reflect what people necessarily wanted. And also, I'm not sure that we disaggregated the data effectively. Did we look at global responses or did we look at regional responses? Like, you've really got to ask yourself what dimensions you're going to cut the data on. I want to actually call out something about the data that you have here, which is, again, learning and growth opportunities and work-life balance were 50% of the most important factors while choosing a job. And compensation was 9%. So, yes, there may be a say-do gap here, but this is a pretty chunky difference in other words, we're not like splitting hairs in these responses. People may actually make decisions based upon comp, but these data are pretty strong.
And one of the things that I think this illustrates, and it goes back to the earlier point of saying that this generation doesn't have grit coming into the workforce. These folks are ambitious. They are picking their opportunity based on their growth potential and learning and development opportunities. This isn't a lazy generation entering the workforce. They crave upward growth. They are looking for organizations that will see them as rock stars and develop them as such, but they're not going to do it at risk to their physical and mental health.
Yeah. First of all, I've never quite bought the whole generational difference thing. I think we have different needs at different ages, and then we forget what we were like, at a particular age. But what else is interesting about this, and interesting to see these two data sets together, because on the one hand, we've got shift shock. On the other hand, we've got most important factor while choosing job if you're early in career. The people who are talking about what they want from work here have never actually necessarily owned this product before. It's like shopping for your first car. You think you want something, but actually, when you get there, you find out, oh, I was not shopping appropriately. Turnover historically has always been way higher second year out of school. And I suspect it's because there's a learning curve about the product where if we ask this same question of people 2 years out of school, they might say something different. Team culture was 8% of the respondents. That might just be because they haven't owned this product before.
You don't know what you don't know.
Right. 7% said social consciousness of the company. The data here around most important factor while choosing jobs, it was a lot of people. It was thousands of people. And so it's a large data set. I'm wondering, have you had a chance to break it down at all by, for instance, degree being earned or some other factor?
So In terms of degree being earned, it wasn't necessarily a specific degree, but we broke it down. We did a little bit of a drill down into bachelor's, master's, associate's degree, doctorate, that sort of thing, but not necessarily to the particular specialization. So the results were not surprising. They were really unremarkable in terms of the breakdown because the trends just kind of went across across all of the graduates, regardless of whether they were graduating with an associate's degree or a doctorate.
So for somebody looking for work, they're looking at a new role and they're thinking about where they're going. What's your advice to them?
My first piece of advice is always to take a personal inventory. Figure out what it is you want. What are you looking to get out of a job? We all know that everyone is looking to get a paycheck out of a job. So you can, kind of scratch that off the list. But what matters to you? Does it matter to you that the company is socially conscious? Does it matter to you that the company has unlimited PTO? Does it matter to you that the company is green? Or what is it that will really make you passionate about an organization? And from there, then let's look at what makes you passionate about a role. What is it that you're hoping to get from work? There are so many of us who have loved what we do for work and not loved the place where we were doing it. And it's very important that in your search that you marry those two concepts. Because if you love your job and you're doing it in a place that you dread going to, you're probably not going to have the best work experience.
A lot of my research has been around what people want from work. I'm not sure people have always, there's a maybe 50% of the people I talk to have not thought deeply about what they want. And maybe even if they have a hard time articulating it in a way that I can respond to it as an employer.
I would agree with that. And, one of the questions that I ask folks that I'm interviewing is, what are you hoping to get out of this? What will happen here during the day that will make you, in that quiet moment when you're home and you've decompressed, that will make you excited about what you've done today? And there's usually a very long and dramatic pause by the interviewee because apparently no one's asked that question before.
Right. Well, let me actually ask the research question that I ask so often of you, which is, what job do you hire your job to do for you?
I hire my job to help me make someone else's life experience better.
Let me dig into that. Can you tell me a time when you were able to make someone else's life experience better? That was the best instance of that. Like you look back on it and you say, that was a good one.
They are all very special for me. But years ago, I was interviewing a candidate and I could tell that there was something going on with them. And I stopped the interview and said, I'm going to break character for a minute here because I'm a little bit worried. Are you okay today? And the candidate broke down crying and shared a story that made me cry. And I said, okay, I'm very sorry that I dumped all of this on you. I should probably go. And I said, I actually just like it if you'd stay for a few minutes. I'm going to step out. I need to do something really quickly and I'll be right back. And so I walked out and I went to the hiring manager and I said, I need you to interview this candidate right now. I can't have them come back in. I need you to talk to them right now. The hiring manager went, talked to them, came back and said, wow, they're really great. We need to kind of discuss the offer. Like, tell me what you want to do. The candidate is still sitting in there. And I'm sure the candidate is thinking, like, I'm wondering what's going on. And we reached an agreement on what we were going to offer them. I went into my office. I produced the offer letter, came back and said, we'd like to offer you this role. And we'd like for you to start as soon as you possibly can. And just put his head down and didn't say anything and didn't move. And I said, do you need a little bit of time? Because I'm happy to step out. And held his head up and he said, I can't thank you. You don't know what this has been like for me. What I do know is that we're going to make it a little better for you.
Man, I have to say, I mean, as somebody coming in to be able to show vulnerability and be hired into that situation, how did that person go on in the company?
It is my understanding that they are a supervisor in that company now. They are, in fact, still there all of these years later.
Is there a characteristic, and I'll tell you where this comes from, which is my wife is somebody who really focuses on helping people. But I ask her, are there some people who you like to help more? So if I was designing a job in which you got to help people, in which you got to make others experience better, are there people you want to help? And she's very, very passionate about second language learners, people coming into the country who, kids, especially 6-year-olds, he really focuses on kindergartners and their parents. And I said, well, what about the homeless issue? And she says, that's absolutely incredibly important. Those people should be helped. I said, do you want to help them? And she said, absolutely, I do. I said, but not as much as these others. Well, she says, yeah, but she actually never said that there was a difference for her. But I think she was more qualified and could actually provide a much greater value to second language learners. Anyway, so my question is, are all causes equal to you? Is everyone equal? Are there situations where you feel like your help is more important?
I will say that I tend to have a pull towards folks who the opportunity changes their circumstance. In my family, we have this experience of understanding how one opportunity can change your circumstance. My grandmother was a domestic worker, and a friend of hers got a job at Rollins College in Winter Park, Florida. And she told my grandmother about an opportunity there that if she took the job at Rollins, the children of employees could go to college for free. My grandmother had worked for the same family for a very long time. And she went to them and said, this means that my girls can get an education. This is the opportunity for them. My grandmother had an 11th grade education, but she saw that job as the opportunity to change the circumstance of our family. So, in doing that, that small thing and someone creating that opportunity for her, it has led to one of my aunts having a doctorate in education, the other having a master's degree. My mother is a retired executive from Walt Disney World. I'm an executive having this conversation with you on a podcast. And all of those things occurred because someone created an opportunity for her to change all of our circumstance.
Yeah. And when you change somebody's circumstance, have you had the experience of witnessing that change?
I have. And it makes every hard day and every unfortunate job that I've had worth it. I would do all of those things over again as I look back on folks who have been able to elevate themselves. And for one person, it was having a job at a company that had 100% educational assistance that allowed them to get a degree and make more money and move their children out of a situation that wasn't great for them. For someone else, it was having a role at a place that had health insurance where I knew that our health insurance didn't cover something that their child absolutely needed in a meaningful way. And being able to, as we looked at plan design, try to move the needle on that to make sure that this person was able to take care of their child. Their child graduated from high school not long ago. Those are the things that keep me in this profession. Those are the things that make me love what I do.
And here's a follow-on question to this, which is completely the other side of it. Up until now, I've been asking the question of everybody, what job do you hire your job to do for you? And it's interesting, there's about 30 different answers. There's a lot of diversity in what people want from work. Helping others is not as high as I thought it was, but it's very high on the list. But I haven't been asking this other question, which is, what does your job cost you?
If I'm doing my job in a good place, a good organization, the job doesn't cost me anything. That's what I want. What has my job cost me? It's lots of strain. I've been in places that were damaging to my mental health. I have had jobs where I ran myself ragged until I became physically ill. Like, jobs can cost you a lot. And I guess it's why I'm so passionate about creating an employee experience where the job doesn't cost you your peace and it doesn't cost you your happiness.
Yeah, I think you're at a great company to do that, by the way. I mean, that's certainly the Muse's mission.
It is. Being here is something that is just truly amazing. I have the best job in the world, and I work for a company that does the thing that I believe in so passionately, which is change someone's circumstance.
Let me ask one other question. Actually, this is another question, which is, do you think that HR organizations are set up to do the best thing for the workforce? Are they incented? Yeah, why not? In what way are they not?
I think that you not let me go to the SHRM conference. I genuinely feel that the profession is broken in a lot of ways. You have a lot of folks in the profession and a lot of organizations who view the humans as resources and not as people.
Yes. And there's kind of two sides to that. Do you feel that HR professionals inside organizations are set up to or incented to treat people as people versus resources?
In most organizations, I would say no. I think that a lot of organizations force HR into the mindset that their job is to serve the company and not the employees. And there is this push to for HR to help drive production instead of drive satisfaction. And so HR professionals are not incentivized to do that. They're incentivized to keep people satisfied enough to work, but not satisfied enough to enjoy the work or where they are working.
And is the training associated with the profession set up to teach people to be able to navigate that challenge?
It's not. So much of HR training, it focuses less on soft skills. I love to ask people, like, what are you learning about HR? Like folks who are studying HR or studying for certifications, and empathy is not a part of your development as an HR professional. Managing up is not part of your training as an HR professional. It's, have you checked all the boxes? Are you making sure that people are checking all of the boxes? And less of, how do we make sure that this is a good thing, a good place, that these decisions are good? And it's difficult for a lot of folks to unlearn those behaviors and to shift their mindset into being people focused and looking for people centered solutions. And it really does a lot of damage to the profession, but it also does a lot of damage to the professional. At some point, all of those things weigh so heavily on you that you could be a fantastic empathetic person and you're just not in a position where you're able to practice that, and you don't feel that you can shift your organization in a way that will be meaningful to change the employee experience, and you get burned out.
Yeah. It's funny because I've done exit interviews with senior HR professionals, people running whole organizations who have risen up through the profession. And generally happy people, right? These are people who I'd known for a long time, very positive, very compelling in terms of their leadership. But when I interviewed them, they were bitter. This was 10 years ago. So it was all pre-pandemic. I really couldn't place what the bitterness was. In fact, it was like I was meeting different people. These were people who felt like their careers had in some way failed. And I suspect it's because a lot of people do come into the profession to help others, but are in some way not empowered to do that. I don't completely understand this, and maybe you can shed some light on it, which is there's one hand which is incented or empowered, and the other hand is just not having the agency to be able to make a difference in the organization. Why not?
HR in many organizations doesn't have a seat at the table. And so it's very difficult for the HR leaders to affect change because you're not a part of the conversations where decisions are made. Another thing along those lines is also I've known a lot of fearful HR people, folks who don't feel that the function is valued. And they think if they make a lot of noise, the function will just disappear, or maybe they won't be there anymore. I tell folks who I mentor and folks who work with me, anyone who will listen to me, that the most dangerous thing in an organization is to have a yes person as an HR leader. The person who is leading human resources has to be brave and fearless and make a lot of noise and walk really tall and have a seat at the table and make sure that they are being heard. Because a lot of HR folks have been silenced throughout their careers and they internalize all of their broken hopes and dreams for an organization until they're just kind of going through the motions. And as you said, in their exit interviews, they were a completely different person than the person who walked in there hoping to make changes.
One of the things that happens, I think, is that in the desire to get a seat at the table, the only way to do that is to speak about people as resources, which is if you're a leader, you're running a company, and I want to get a seat at your table, I need to come to your table speaking your language, which may be from the perspective of I need people to get some work done as a resource. So there's this kind of a filtering process that goes on. There's two things that happen. One is that the kind of people who end up at the table are the ones who treat people as inputs to production. Or they get there pretending that, but then they're kind of stuck in it, and it's hard. Some of the best chief people officers I've ever worked with, one of them actually hired the CEO, and so had a partnership with the CEO that went really deep and was trusted and was able to bring her company to the top of the Fortune 50 HR list of places to work. Just to tell you a little bit about my work, I think it's very relevant to what we were just talking about, is that I'm arguing that employees are customers. And I'm arguing they're not like customers, they actually are customers in a multi-sided business model. So there are lots of multi-sided business models. Uber has drivers. They recognize drivers. They're not their employees, they recognize them as customers and think about them as what's the product that I'm selling. And we've been in this very industrial age concept business model that says that employees are part of a pipeline that leads to products that goes to customers. But the most successful companies of the last 20 years have been platform models, multi-sided. You can use that kind of model to say that employees are customers on one end of a multi-sided business. That changes the conversation when you get a seat at the table, because all of a sudden when you sit at that table, you're not representing an input to production, you're representing a stand-up customer. And then you can start to talk about what's the product that we're selling to that customer. How are we going to design and build it and deliver it better? And so that's my whole thesis. That's what I'm going after. And it's very un-SHRM, but it should be SHRM. That's my belief.
I believe that. I'm with you there. Creating raving fans isn't something that should just be external facing. We should have raving fans in the organization as well.
If people want to learn more, is there any place that they can learn more about your work or your company's work?
Yes, absolutely. You can certainly learn about the Muse by visiting our website, also following us on social, and seeing all of the great companies that we profile, all of the amazing and elevating career advice that we provide, and going to the Muse to help you find your dream job, because they certainly have mine.
That's great. Well, thank you so much for coming in today. I've really enjoyed the conversation.
You're very welcome. Thank you so much. This is a wonderful conversation.
Thanks for joining me for another episode of Work for Humans. If you enjoyed this episode, please give us a 5-star rating wherever you listen to podcasts. And share the show with one person you think would get value from it. Believe it or not, this really helps us grow the show and reach more people who want to build the kind of work that people really want. As always, thank you to my producer, Jason Ames at Ninth Path Audio, for his insights into content and his high standard for quality. Final note, the opinions shared here are my own and not the views of Google or Cisco Systems. Thanks again for listening. See you next time.